The last topic we're going to discuss is the home buyer's rescission period. So the HBRP, if you see that acronym anywhere in your notes or maybe in your hints on your quiz questions, that's what it's about. So make sure that you highlight that or star it so that you know where to come back to find it. What is this all about? This is a 2023 change to statute law. So remember, going all the way back to the first chapter that we covered in your course, sometimes we need to pass statute laws in order to better protect people. So common law and all of the other statute laws, including the Property Law Act that was changed, didn't do a good enough job of protecting people in certain situations. We're going to talk about what that situation is. Section 42 is about the home buyer's rescission period, and this is about residential buyers of property who now are being given the ability to rescind or cancel. So that word rescind means cancel. They can rescind or cancel their contract after they've put in an offer and it's been accepted by the seller. Now, the first thing you need to know is, what is residential property? Residential property is all the usual stuff that we know of and love. So detached and semi-detached homes, townhouse, apartment, condo, duplex, triplex. Included also in it is a residential strata lot, manufactured homes affixed to the land. So remember, if it can be pulled away, it's a chattel, but if it's affixed to the land, it's now considered to be a fixture. And then any cooperative interest where you have the right to use and occupy a unit after you've bought in or purchased your shares in that cooperative interest. So if you can't remember the details about the cooperative interest or the residential strata lot, you can go back to one of your previous chapters and refresh your memory. So condo, residential strata lot is the same thing as well, just to mention that. What is the HBRP all about? It's about protecting buyers, purchasers of real estate, residential real estate, who feel that they've been pressured into a sale, into what is called a high-risk sale. So what is a high-risk sale? When the buyer feels that because of the extreme situation of the market and intense competition, that they have to submit an offer that is for way more money than the property was listed for. Or maybe they feel that they have to submit an offer that has no subject clauses that would allow them to actually walk away from the deal. If there's no subject clauses and you just submit an offer and say, this is what I'm willing to pay, and the seller says yes, then you are in that contract. The deal is made, the deal is struck, and you're expected to go through with it. But this HBRP provides buyers with a way and a means for a short period for them to actually back out if they feel that they were pressured into this high-risk sale. So think of the market here in BC over the last 10 years. If you've been here to sort of know and observe what's been going on, it's been kind of up and down here and there, but there's been some periods in the BC market where it's been so hard for buyers to actually get a seller to pay them attention, because it's been such a strong seller's market in those periods where the seller had 30 offers for their one property that they were selling. And so they could pick the best one, the very best one that suited their needs and was the highest price, and in that bunch. And so that is very, very tough competition. In those situations, a buyer might feel that they need to throw more money at the seller in order to get them to pay attention. Hey, look at me over here. Or that they put in no subject clauses, no conditions precedent, they might call it, in order to allow them to walk away from the deal. And so that is considered to be the high risk situation that you would be able to take advantage of this HBRP. And just a note, the higher offer, they could use a couple of different ways to say that. They could say that it's an inflated price, or they could maybe say that the buyer offered, such and such X amount of dollars in excess of the list price, just to show you that they offered more than what the property was listed for. And that situation might be considered to be a high risk sale if the market was really aggressive and it was tough for buyers to get sellers to pay attention to their offers. Okay, so protection, 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 right? That's what the laws are all about. That's what this specifically, this change specifically does for purchasers. Now, again, there's some situations, right? There's some limitations where you're not going to be able to do it. And there's some things that you're required to do as the buyer who wants to rescind. So, what is required of you? If you choose to take advantage of this right to rescind the contract, you have to do it within 3 business days of entering into the contract, and you are required to pay 0.25% of the purchase price that you offered. So if you offered $1 million for a townhouse in Richmond or Burnaby, and you decided you wanted to back off and walk away, and you changed your mind, you would need to pay the seller $2,500 to exercise your right to rescind the contract that you just entered into with them. Okay? Has to be done within 3 business days. So Saturdays, Sundays don't count, and BC holidays also don't count. And the first business day is the one that follows the day where the offer was accepted, because we don't know what time the offer might be accepted on that day. It could be 5 in the morning, or it could be 11 p.m. at night, and it's not fair to count that as a whole day. So we start the next business day, and then we count 3 business days after that, and then that is the cutoff date for you to be able to take advantage of this right to rescind. So the example that we have here is January 11th. The Saturday and Sunday, the 13th and 14th, don't count in 2024 as we're in the examples in 2024. So 13th and 14th are Saturday, Sunday, they don't count. The first business day is the day after the accepted offer on January 11th. So the 12th would be business day number 1. The 15th would be business day number 2, and the Tuesday, the 16th, would be business day number 3. So the buyer would have until the end of day on Tuesday, the 16th, to rescind their offer if they decided they wanted to change their mind. Okay, so remember, holidays, BC holidays, statutory holidays that we observe here in BC are not counted. So January 1st would not be counted in as a business day, even though it falls on a Monday on this this calendar year 2024. Okay. When can you not rescind? When are you not allowed to rescind? Well, when you're buying commercial property, you're not allowed to rescind. Remember, we said it was residential properties only. When you're buying residential property on leased land, so leasehold interests are included in that. And when you're buying a development unit, so development units that are under the REDMA, the Real Estate Development Marketing Act. So the REDMA gives a 7-day rescission period. So you wouldn't override the 7-day period with the 3-day HBRP period. You would give them the longer of the two, right? And we'd said residential properties, development units wasn't on that list. And the reason why is because they get a little bit longer to decide whether they want to rescind or not. So REDMA development units are separated. They're not part of this. They get 7 days, but all of those residential properties that we had on the list for you earlier, they would get 3 days. You also can't rescind when you're buying a property at an auction, or when you buy a property that is under court order or court supervision, and that includes all of your foreclosures. So if somebody defaulted on their mortgage and the property was foreclosed by the lender, then you wouldn't get the right to rescind if you put in an offer in that situation. The other important thing, this should be a slide all by itself, to be honest, I think, but super, super important to remember that you cannot waive this right to rescind. So it doesn't matter, even if the buyer and seller agree to waive it, it's not effective. It's not actually legal, because they're saying, let's break the law. Okay, so let's just ignore the law or break the law. And we know that that's not allowed. Okay, so you cannot waive this by either party. So even if the buyer agrees to it, it's not effective. It doesn't take effect, and it's not binding on that buyer. Okay, so why have we been talking about this for the last 5 minutes? You want to know what your obligations are as a licensee. You want to know how you're going to protect your client. Now, disclose, disclose, disclose. We've talked about that a couple times. We'll probably talk about it some more before the end of your course. You're going to give disclosure to your client and explain some things about what kind of a relationship you're going to have with them and how you're going to represent them right at the beginning by giving them the disclosure of representation and trading services form. So DORTS form for short. This is given before services are provided, and it's got a bunch of information in there, and including now in there is the information about the HBRP. So you're going to explain that to your client in detail to make sure that they understand the info. And it doesn't matter whether you're representing a seller or a buyer, you're gonna do it just the same. So you explain it to your buyer or you explain it to your seller. Then additional disclosure needs to be made later on in the relationship, right? When you either draft an offer for your buyer or when you go and present an offer that you've received from a buyer to your seller. So you're going to go over all of the information again with them, is refresh their memory as a reminder of what you already spoke with them about previously. So you need to explain that it can't be waived. Remember, we said it's not allowed to be waived. Even if they agree to waive it, they can't. You can't agree to break the law or ignore the law, right? So you say it can't be waived, that there's a time period. The rescission period is 3 business days. Any deposits that are paid, if the buyer decides to rescind and they do it properly and within the 3 business day period, then any deposits that they've given need to be returned to the buyer. You need to explain the list of exemptions to your client to make sure that they understand when and when not it can be done. And then you also need to calculate out the dollar amount and explain how it needs to be paid, that it needs to be paid promptly, and that kind of thing. So when you give disclosure here at the beginning, you don't really know where the buyer is going to land for a purchase price. You don't really know where the seller is going to land and end up for a purchase price. So you can't really do the calculation there. You need to do it when you actually get the offer in so that you have a dollar amount that's been offered. So again, like the math that we did before, if you had a $1 million property, you would explain to your buyer that if they decided to rescind this contract after it's been accepted, right? If the offer that you're writing for them gets accepted and it becomes a contract, they want to rescind, they would have to pay that seller $2,500. Same thing for the explanation for the seller. You'd explain to the seller when you're presenting the offer to them, hey, if you accept this offer and the buyer decides to back out of the deal, then they are obligated to pay you $2,500 to exercise that right to rescind. Okay, so 2 ways to give disclosure. You can give disclosure on what's called a buyer's right of rescission form. So that's a form that's provided by BCFSA. Or you can just put it in the contract of purchase and sale. And a lot of agents like to do that because then it gives both sides the reminder that they need to go over that point and explain it to their client. If you're helping an unrepresented party, you're not representing them, right? They're not your client. And so you're not supposed to be providing advice to them. You have to be very careful just to give factual information only to that unrepresented party about the HBRP and about everything else that you would talk with them about. So if they want advice about the HBRP or about anything, then they should be advised to go and seek independent legal advice because you're not their advisor, you're not their representative. They would need to go and talk to whoever it is that they're getting that advice from. So friend, family, maybe they know a notary or lawyer, or they have one, on their staff that they go to regularly if, they do deals quite often. So pretty straightforward info, and you just make sure that you remember that there's those 2 ways to give that disclosure, that there's an option to put it on the contract of purchase and sale if that's what the agent representing the buyer decides to do. Now, how do you actually give the notice? How do you actually deliver the notice? Well, it needs to be in writing, and it has to be done within those 3 business days. It can be given on any of the days, 1, 2, or 3, just as long as it's done by the end of that day 3. And you can serve that notice by registered mail, fax, or email, and it's considered to be delivered on the day that it was sent. So the person doesn't need to receive it or read it on the other end, right? You don't know when they're going to open their email or look at all of their faxes. As long as it's sent within those 3 business days, it's fine, and it is allowed to be done. Info to include in it is the address, PID, or the description of the property. You don't have to have all 3, but I mean, it's good to have all 3, but one of them is good enough. Purchaser's name and signature to say that yes, they do want to rescind. The names of the sellers to address it to them, to let them know that it's the offer that in the contract that they formed with that buyer that they want to rescind, and then the date that the rescission is being done and exercised. And that's just to prove that it was done in the period of time. And then when it's delivered to the seller, that they know that that is the case. Now, there's no mandatory form. You don't have to use that form that we were talking about before, the right of rescission form by BCFSA, but they do have it for use, and they do like it when you use their stuff. So you might as well, if you have that ability, to do that. We'll do a question. So Kenny Angus wanted to present an offer to purchase on Bertha's house. However, Angus was reluctant to include a deposit with his offer. Which of the following statements here is true? So let's do them one by one. The first one says, unless Angus includes a deposit, he is not giving any consideration and a binding contract will not be formed. Hopefully you remember that is a false statement, right? We learned in the previous chapter that you don't have to include a deposit at all with a contract, right? You don't have to include it with your offer. It can actually form a binding contract. Okay, so we know that one's false. Let's go to number 2. If Angus makes the offer and gives a deposit to the brokerage, should he later withdraw his offer after acceptance and after the expiry of the home buyer rescission period, then his deposit will not be returned unless Bertha agrees. So you might be confused or unsure as to whether this one is true or false. So let's move on to 3 and 4 and see if we can get some easier answers that will help us rule them out. Number 3 says, if Angus is worried about giving the deposit before the offer is accepted, the trading services licensee can agree to hold the deposit check and not deposit it until the offer is accepted. So also from the last chapter, I hope you remember that is a false statement, because as soon as you accept that deposit check, you are considered to be a stakeholder, you and the brokerage, and it needs to go into the trust account ASAP. Directly, immediately, as soon as possible. Okay, so that one's false, because you're not supposed to be holding on to deposit checks. You're supposed to deposit them. So that one's false. Number 1 is false. So we know it's either true or 4. So let's look at 4. Even if Angus placed the deposit with his lawyer, the Real Estate Services Act requires the lawyer to hold the deposit as a stakeholder. This is not true. It doesn't require the lawyer to be a stakeholder, because the Real Estate Services Act is about licensees and brokerages, right? So the licensee and the brokerage are a stakeholder, but the lawyer isn't, unless they accept it and acknowledge that they are a stakeholder when they accept it. And we haven't been given indication of that. So in this case, the lawyer isn't a stakeholder, so that one is false, and that means that number 2 is the true answer. Now, let me break this down for you to make sure that you understand why it's true. So if Angus makes an offer, gives a deposit, withdraws his offer, but he does it after the expiry of the home buyer rescission period, the seller, Bertha, doesn't have to give his deposit back. She can if she agrees to, but because he's after that 3-day period, that binding contract was formed, and Bertha doesn't have to return it to him. So that's the reason why this is true, is because it says it will not be returned unless she agrees. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. Good job, you survived. Hopefully it wasn't too much for you. There are quite a few topics in this chapter. You'll probably need to come back and review. I encourage you to do that. Review as much as you can, and try to watch the other instructors' videos if you want to review, different little pieces. So you maybe go to Yana's video and take a peek there to see if you're having troubles with a particular concept. A lot of times, maybe the instructor will phrase things in a different way that will make the light bulb turn on, and it will help you to understand, what it is that you are having a hard time with. All right. So that's everything. Thank you, and I will see you on the next video.